Gardenia's Pokemon are unable to battle. Lucas is the winner, the official declared. As Lucas's eyes lit up with joy, his Prinplup turned to face him and gave him a smile of satisfaction. "We did it, Prinplup," the boy exclaimed. Gardenia smiled faintly. As she presented the young boy with his gym badge, Lucas smiled, his heart swelling with happiness. Gardenia's once soft face had suddenly become void of emotion. There was some sort of resentment towards the boy. Finally, the gym leader spoke. "Well done, Lucas. You and your Pokemon did a terrific job of battling in unison. I now understand that your love for your Pokemon surpasses even my own. I must continue training. Hopefully you and I will battle again." As she smiled dimly, Lucas noticed the lifeless look in her eyes, and he began to back away in fright. Thanks for everything," he managed to murmur before walking away. Lucas felt the bitterness and resentment emitting from the defeated gym leader. Now out of her sight and away from the Eterna gym, he headed east to the Pokemon Center. "Why, hello there, Lucas. How did your battle with Gardenia go?" Nurse Joy asked as he approached the counter. Lucas proudly showed off his newly acquired gym badge. "Congratulations, Lucas," Nurse Joy said, clearly impressed. "After that battle, your Pokemon deserve a good rest. Say, Lucas, I have an errand for you. Do you mind taking this package to Mr. Ferguson? He's really easy to spot. He's the old man who was attending his garden when you first got here." Nurse Joy's sparkling eyes made it impossible for the boy to say no. "Of course!" Lucas clenched his fist with eagerness. "I'll have that package delivered in no time." Taking the package from the woman, Lucas rushed out the door. Upon exiting, he found himself crashing into someone. "Hey, are you okay?" Lucas asked curiously, rubbing his forehead a bit. As the boy opened his eyes, he was shocked to see a distraught Gardenia sitting on the ground. "Gardenia?" His voice trembled a bit. "Are you all right?" "Fine," she whispered. Lucas was the first to stand up. He brushed the dirt off of his pants and extended his hand to the fallen woman. "Gardenia?" he questioned, his hand still offering to help the woman up. Gardenia remained seated, her expression blank, her once cheerful eyes now cold. "Leave me alone." Again her voice was a harsh whisper. Lucas shook his head and turned his back, walking away from the eerie woman sitting on the ground. Gardenia's image kept returning as he walked to Mr. Ferguson's house. What had happened to the sweet young girl who welcomed him to her gym just hours ago? Shaking the uneasy feeling off, Lucas arrived at Mr. Ferguson's home. As Nurse Joy had stated previously, the old man was indeed tending to his garden. His Roselia happily helped him pick berries, and replant them as well. "Mr. Ferguson?" As Lucas's voice chimed in, the old man wiped the sweat off his forehead and turned to face the young boy. "Yes?" the old man curiously questioned. "I have a package here. Nurse Joy asked me to deliver it to you." The boy searched his backpack and took out the small package. "A package, huh? Well, come inside, my boy. Come on, Roselia." The small Pokemon happily followed its owner into the house. Lucas pushed open the front gate and followed behind the man. But he froze before he did. That uneasy feeling from before had returned. It was preventing him from continuing further. His heart began to race, his skin crawling. It was as if someone was watching him. Slightly turning his head, he saw that familiar, distraught face. It was Gardenia. "No. How?" the boy whispered. She was staring right at him, as if she was gazing into his very soul. The boy trembled, his heart pounding as if it were going to burst from his chest. He turned to fully face her, but as he did, a group of kids riding their bicycles rushed past him, startling him even more. As the dust cleared, Lucas looked around, scanning the perimeter to see if Gardenia was still present. She had disappeared. With a heavy sigh, he thought to himself, "You're just worked up, Lucas." Again turning around, he quickly walked into Mr. Ferguson's house. "You okay, lad? You look like you've just seen a ghost." Mr. Ferguson's comment unnerved Lucas further, but his smile did cheer him up again. "So, let's see what's in that package," Mr. Ferguson said, Lucas staring out the window. "Lad?" he questioned. Again, no response. Lucas was frozen. Mr. Ferguson reached out, placing his hand on Lucas's shoulder. Lucas yelled, falling back in the process. The boy was terrified. Mr. Ferguson looked out the window. No one was there save a few wild starley. "Everything's okay," Mr. Ferguson said, kneeling beside the terrified trainer. He took the small package and helped the boy to a seat. "Roselia, use aromatherapy." A sweet scent filled the air, and Lucas found himself at peace. The small Pokemon sat near the boy, hoping to relax him further. "So, what is your name?" the man finally asked. "Lucas," the boy replied. Mr. Ferguson curiously examined the package Lucas had brought him, but before opening it up, he looked out the window. Again, nothing. He was curious as to what Lucas was so frightened about, but before he would question the boy, he opened his package. Inside it was a small wooden box. The man opened it, and it began to play a song. The man remained still, as if something or someone had taken a hold of him. This time, it was Lucas who sought the man's attention. "Mr. Ferguson, are you okay?" As the music continued to play, it seemed to have paralyzed the man. Lucas remained silent and waited for the music to stop. "Aurelia," the man whispered, 2 tears beginning to trickle down his soft face. "Lucas, you said Nurse Joy gave you this package?" The boy nodded his head. "Did she say who gave it to her?" "No, sir, she did not." Lucas's words sent a chilling feeling down Mr. Ferguson's spine. "This was my granddaughter's. She lived in the old chateau with her sister and her parents. I remember the day I gave it to Aurelia. Gardenia was not happy about it." "Gardenia?" Lucas's eyes widened. Again that feeling returned. "Yes, Gardenia. She is my granddaughter also. You have defeated her, right?" A shining light from the inside of Lucas's jacket confirmed his speculation. "Lucas, run. Run far away from Eterna and never return. Gardenia, she's not." As the music box began to play again, Mr. Ferguson looked out the window. This time the woman was standing right outside of it. As the music box began to play again, Mr. Ferguson looked out the window. This time the woman was standing right outside of it. The man screamed in terror, Lucas turning to face the same window. No one was there. Still, Mr. Ferguson was panicking, beginning to push Lucas out of the house. "Run, lad, run!" He slammed the door, leaving Lucas outside in the dark. Lucas searched his side to summon his Pokemon, but they weren't there, still recovering from the battle earlier. Lucas did what any normal person would do. He ran. Whatever Mr. Ferguson saw scared him, and whoever it was knew it. As Lucas saw the lights of the Pokemon Center ahead, his heart's pacing began to ease. He rushed inside the center, huffing and puffing, completely out of breath. "What's wrong, Lucas?" Nurse Joy asked with concern. The boy couldn't describe what he had just witnessed. No one would believe him. "Nurse Joy, do you have a room I can stay in? And are my Pokemon healthy? I would much like it if they were by my side tonight." "Of course," the nurse said with a smile, handing him his 3 Pokeballs. She led him to the guest quarters, asking, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Lucas shook his head. "Well, if you need anything..." Before she could finish her sentence, Lucas had slammed the door shut. The sound of the locks turning was heard thereafter. Inside the room, Lucas began to panic. Without hesitating, he summoned his Pokemon to his side. They noticed the panic on his face and quickly sat by his feet. That night, the boy could not sleep. Gardenia's face kept appearing in his thoughts. Then Mr. Ferguson's breakdown continued to replay in his mind over and over again. Lucas looked at his watch. It was 3 a.m. 2 of his Pokemon had fallen asleep, but his Prinplup persistently kept watch over his trainer. As footsteps echoed down the hallway, Lucas's eyes grew wide. After a few moments, the knob to his door began to jiggle. Lucas swallowed hard, his awakened Luxio beginning to growl at the door. The familiar sound of the music box began to play. Lucas pulled his blanket over himself and cupped his hands over his ears. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" he began to cry to himself. Luxio's growling abruptly stopped, as well as the music and the jiggling of the knob. There were no footsteps, nothing. Sunlight had breached the boy's window. He looked outside and saw the starly flying about. That once peaceful sight meant nothing to the boy. His soft face had become filled with anxiety, large dark circles surrounding his sleepless eyes. Prinplup and Luxio had fallen asleep shortly after the incident. Lucas stood up, stirring his Pokemon in the process. Luxio quickly ran to the door. He sniffed about and nodded to his trainer. Lucas opened the door cautiously, peering down the long hallway. The coast was clear, although both Pokemon stood by their trainer as he made his way into the main lobby of the Pokemon Center. Nurse Joy caught a glimpse of the boy. Shocked to see his restless condition, she rushed up to him. Luxio quickly growled at her. Both Pokemon didn't seem to trust anybody but their trainer after last night's experience. "Luxio," Lucas weakly muttered. "She's okay." Luxio relaxed at the sound of his trainer's voice. "What happened to you?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Nurse Joy grabbed him by the hand, her eyes locking into his. "Please, tell me." So he did. After hearing his story, she sat silently. "That music box, he said it was Aurelia's? That means it was taken from the old chateau, and only one person visits there. Gardenia." Lucas wondered why Gardenia would send her grandfather that music box. It didn't make sense to him, or why Mr. Ferguson flew into a panic when he looked out the window. Lucas decided to say no more to Nurse Joy. He gathered his belongings and left the center. As he made his exit, Mr. Ferguson's Roselia ran up to him in tears. It took his hand and led him back to Mr. Ferguson's house quickly. In the distance, he could see police cars outside the home. "What happened?" Lucas asked the officer guarding the entrance to the house. "We found him completely torn up, like some sort of animal came in here and ripped him to shreds. I can't even describe it. The worst part is there were no signs of entry. The windows and doors were locked. It just doesn't make sense." Lucas felt sick. He had just seen that man yesterday. Something else caught his attention. The man's once beautiful garden had become completely lifeless, empty, wilted. "I delivered a music box to him yesterday. Is it still there?" "No, we haven't seen one," the officer replied. Lucas looked at the frantic Roselia. It was trying to lead him somewhere. It urged him to follow him, so he obeyed. Lucas found himself in the Eterna forest, Roselia still clinging to him. Eventually the eager Pokemon brought him to his destination, the old chateau. Lucas looked around slowly, observing the state of disrepair the manor now stood in. The atmosphere it held contained an unspeakable darkness, as though haunted by demons. Lucas could easily see why so many legends surrounded this fallen estate. A thin mist hung in the air, making it difficult to see far ahead. Swallowing a lump of fear in his throat, Lucas slowly walked through the now desolate garden. The area had obviously been designed for many plants and flowers to grow, but only dull patches of dead soil remained. Roselia followed after Lucas, trembling as it noticed a pair of fierce-looking demonic statues. They sat atop the two pillars supporting the courtyard gates, one of which had collapsed to the ground, the other leaning heavily. Lucas and Roselia crept past the mangled gates to find the courtyard walls covered in a plethora of thick vines. A fountain upon which an angel statue stood was all that was left. It was faded and badly cracked in some areas, some of its face lying in pieces on the pavement. Most of the windows in this area of the manor were boarded up, the main door chained shut. A message had been scrawled into the concrete in front of the door. Lucas walked up to inspect the words that appeared to have been scratched in by fingernails. They were somewhat ineligible, but Lucas managed to see they spelt out, "Leave this place." Near the message was a long streak of scratch marks leading to a shattered cellar window. It appeared someone had been forcefully dragged inside the window. Near it lay a chipped fingernail, blood crusted over the lunula. His hands shaking at the sight, Lucas backed away a bit, bumping into Roselia. Remembering why he came here, he took a deep breath, then approached the door and gave its chains a hard tug. The links in his hands snapped like twigs, the metallic snake falling from the door with a loud rustle. Slowly pushing the door open, it creaked and whined as light dimly shined inside the manor. Lucas could see Gardenia standing at the end of a long hallway. The words, "Turn back," were etched into the wall behind her. "Gardenia!" The woman seemed to sway away from the corner, her feet not moving. Rosalia seemed extremely frightened of her, acting strangely and cowering behind Lucas. He ran after her, reaching the end of the hallway to find a spiral staircase. He and Rosalia hurried up them to catch a glimpse of Gardenia at the top. The end of the staircase led to a dusty bedroom that Rosalia refused to enter, sensing an invisible danger. Gardenia had disappeared. Lucas noticed a thick book on a small table near the bed. Picking it up and opening it, he discovered it was a diary. Skimming through it, all the entries seemed to be written by a woman. They were about her daughter, a 9-year-old girl. Lucas turned the page she was on to read the next. June 3rd. The doctors say Aurelia has been seeing invisible people again. She claims they help her feel better. She has an unknown disease slowly killing her. Aurelia suffers from terrible fevers and sometimes coughs up blood. The doctors don't know what to make of it. We have hired them to survey her at all times since there is no hospital nearby. When she isn't resting, Aurelia spends her time playing with the invisible people. She says they are dead, but friendly. Her imagination is worrying me. The page of the last entry was stiffer than the others, dried tears staining some of the words. June 18th. An unspeakable evil has plagued this home. Aurelia's room has become a bloodbath. 2 bodies were found, mangled, torn, and mutilated into unrecognizable masses of flesh and blood, along with our Aurelia. We can't explain it. Aurelia's window was open, but it seems unlikely someone would scale the building and open the window locked from inside. As for our little angel, she remained untouched for some reason. It is with great despair I write that she has succumbed to the disease eating away at her organs. She was found dead along with what we believe are the remains of her 2 doctors. They were the only ones present with her before the murders occurred. We must leave this place at once. I pray you rest well, my dear Aurelia. Lucas noticed something stuck against the back side of the page. Turning it over, he saw it was an old black and white picture of a young girl. That must be her, he thought. A glimpse of sunlight peeked through the mist, shining on the picture for a brief instant. Something caught Lucas's eye, a hidden person standing behind Aurelia. It appeared to be watching over her, like a guardian. Rosalia growled defensively, but Lucas ignored it. The light faded back into the mist, and the figure disappeared from the picture. A voice whispered into Lucas's ear. "Won't you play with us?" He gasped and whirled around to see no one but Rosalia. It ran off down the hall, Lucas following quickly. It stopped abruptly, staring up at the ceiling. There was a pull string indicating an opening. Trembling, Lucas gave it a yank, and a fleet of steps folded down, leading up to what he could only assume was the manor attic. It was pitch black inside. "Please come play with us," the eerie voice urged again. Lucas could hear the chimes of a music box resonating within the darkness. Pulling a flashlight out of his jacket pocket, he turned it on and nervously led the way up the steps. Rosalia stayed behind, but he insisted it come along, and his Pokemon reluctantly followed. As he reached the top of the steps, he could see a little girl sitting in front of the music box, humming the tune it sang. Behind her stood the 2 doctors, one on each side. Lucas watched as the girl gazed down at the music box, noticing some blood on the front of her dress and her chin. As the music slowly died away, she looked up at him with a chilling smile. Suddenly, the girl gasped with a frightened expression, and all 3 spirits faded into the darkness. Lucas turned to see Gardenia pull the attic steps back up, a crazed look in her eyes. "I know it looks bad, But I want you to know I love my sister very much. I was always living in her shadow. At least with us dead, I can be in the spotlight for once. Lucas backed away in fear, his foot bumping into something that clattered. He looked down to see it was the remains of a human skeleton, and frantically stumbled over a bookcase trying to get away from it. A particularly large and heavy book clattered to the dusty floorboards and lay wide open. Don't be so afraid, Lucas. Come have a look, Gardenia insisted, raising a matchbox and a candle. With the use of her spiritual powers, she quickly lit the match and brought life to the candle's wick, shining a dim light in the dark attic. Shaking intensely, Lucas obeyed, crawling over to the book and inspecting its contents with the flickering light. It was full of pictures with names and dates below each one. They all perished here. Many of them disappeared and were never found, Gardenia explained. Focusing, she made the book skip ahead to a certain page that contained Aurelia's picture. What a splendid night it was when they stole her away into the darkness. We were forced to do away with her doctors. Our work had to go unseen. I thought she died from the disease, Lucas said, confused. Gardenia's spirit chuckled and slowly flowed about the attic. That's what we wanted everyone to believe happened. Her spirit was captured by us to suffer in this place forever in torment. You can see why she is afraid of me. This is how things should be. Tell me, Lucas, do you know how many people have died within these walls? Lucas was too afraid to answer as Gardenia looked directly at him. More than you can imagine, she answered as a swarm of ghostly hands came towards the light from the candle. They began to reach out for Lucas as Rosalia went into a defensive stance. Won't you play with us, Lucas? Dozens of voices asked in unison with Gardenia. The Pokeball strapped to his belt floated over to the woman, and Rosalia was forced inside one. Gardenia clenched her open hand into a tight fist, and the Pokeballs were shattered, instantly killing the monsters inside them. You won't need these anymore. Please come play with us, Lucas. Hyperventilating, he backed away into a corner, panicking as the swarm of hands reached out for him. He felt them latch onto him firmly, their touch the coldest he had ever felt. Lucas could barely breathe. There were so many hands clutching onto his entire body. He was frozen in place as Gardenia gently glided closer to him, murmuring, Death isn't as terrible as you'd expect. Think of it as simply going to sleep forever. As the voices continued to chant, Gardenia lay her hand on Lucas's forehead, sending a chilling sensation through his entire body as his eyes instantly closed.